All right, there it is. Don't worry, I don't think that was on the camera.
I really didn't mean to do that.
All right, I want to pick up around Genesis chapter 18. Around the 18th chapter of Genesis. Trying out technology again today. It's exciting what technology can do when it works. We've been talking about Abraham recently. His name was Abram, father, an exalted father. Later changed to Abraham, father of fathers, father of many, of multitudes. And you have to piece together some scriptures to see how it all works out. But Abraham was originally called an Ur of the Chaldees, way back here. And then he traveled up. He was supposed to go to the land of Canaan, but he ended up stopping in Haran, or Haran, I think you pronounce it. And he lived in Haran for several years. And then his father, Terah, died, and God called him again. And then they went down to the land of Canaan. But they took Lot, his nephew, took that with him. Now, when you're just reading in the Genesis account, you hear about Abraham dwelling in Haran, and you think, well, okay, he was living in Haran and God called him there. That sounds a little funny. You have to piece together the book of Acts, Acts chapter 7, where Stephen talks about the call of Abraham as well. When you put those two together, you realize God called the man twice. 2 different times. The first call was in Ur of the Chaldees. He said, Abraham, leave your father, your mother, your household, and go to the land that I will show you, because I'm going to give it to you and make you a great nation. That's the land of Canaan. But instead of going straight over to the land of Canaan, by the way, it makes sense to travel through this route. Why? There's water. You know, you're going to need that. But instead of getting there, they travel up to Haran, and then take a little break. And another break. And another break. And they end up living there several years. And his dad, Terah, apparently liked it there. Eventually, he ends up dying. And Abram is thinking, okay, God comes to Abram again and says, leave your house, your family, and go to the land that I will show you. And so he does leave, except he takes his nephew, Lot, along with him. And he heads to the land of Canaan. But we see, because he took his family with him, he still runs into issues. And then while he's in the land of Canaan, where there's Shechem, Moreh, Luz, formerly it was called Luz, the name was changed to Bethel, things weren't perfect there. They ran out of food, and they had to travel down to the place where they knew food was, in the land of Egypt. And he tells a little lie in the land of Egypt about his wife. He actually has his wife tell a lie. There's a rabbit trail. I'm going to close it up. Try not to go there. But he gets into the land of Egypt where there's food, and he's there for a while because he doesn't know what to do. Now, it's just interesting, a lot of the annoyances that he had to go through. Think of how much simpler it would have been if he just obeyed God immediately. But he obeyed God halfway, half-heartedly. Then he obeyed God 3/4 of the way, and then kind of got there. But then after he was there, he's like, well, God, I don't know, this doesn't seem to be working out quite right. I'm starving. So he left for a while, and he'll end up coming back. Now, I appreciate this. I don't know about you, but this is a friend of God. This is a close man that God's going to bless the world with. And this is the kind of relationship he had with God. This takes place over several years. So maybe there's a little bit of hope for you and I, because sometimes when God says, you know, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me, that's what Jesus says. Well, sometimes we try to do that, but we don't always make it all the way. We kind of, I'll settle for a little bit less, but I'll make a step in the right direction. And then sometimes we do commit, but then we're like, oh, it's getting really hard. Okay, I need a break. Oh, and then we come back. We have these same sorts of issues, right? We kind of go through that. Well, it gets more powerful when you look into the meanings of the names. All right, and we've covered this last week, but real briefly. Ur of the Chaldees. Ur means fire. Chaldees means destruction. Abram left a place of fire and destruction, highly populated city, by the way, but that's what the names meant. And he was supposed to go to the land of Canaan. That means to bow the knee. In the land of Canaan, there's a place that named the place of strength, the place of instruction. That land, Luz, that little city, used to be separation, but it was changed to Bethel. That means house of God. So God said, hey, get to the place where you bow the knee to me, the place of strength, the place of teaching instruction. You're no longer separated from me. You're in the household of God. That's where he wanted Abram to be. But instead of going straight there, he takes Terah with him. Terah was an idolater. His name means to delay. Interesting. Very interesting. He delays and he heads to a place called Haran, which translated means fruitless. He lives in Fruitlessville for several years. And he exists there for a while, spinning his wheels, being fruitless, right? And he's there, and God has to call him again and say, hey, really commit. Go to where I need you to go. Go to that place, to Canaan, where he bows the knee. And he does go, and he is bowing the knee, sort of, until times get tough. And then it's like, oh, it's too hard. I need food. I need something. So he leaves. And he heads to Egypt. We don't know the exact meaning of the word Egypt, but we do know the ending of it tells us it's a dual form word. So it is a plural type word. It's the same ending that you would have for, your eyes or your ears. It's a Hebrew dual. So whatever this word does mean, it has a dual meaning to it. And I think that's also fitting, because instead of being completely committed to bowing the knee to God, your attention's a little bit divided. And don't you feel like that's a struggle that sometimes Christians have? Instead of completely committing, we're mostly committed, but there's that one sin or that 100 group of sins that I'm still, trying to deal with. These types of things, by the way, I said types of things. A word for this would be a type, T-Y-P-E. And a study of this kind of thing would be typology. And I only scratch the surface of this sort of thing, but it's the example of, how the Old Testament tabernacle and the Old Testament temple, the furniture and everything, represents something in the New Testament? Well, that is referred to as a type. Like the table of showbread. That reminds you, in the Messianic kingdom, the kingdom of the church, we have the Lord's Supper, And then it even says the altar of incense, that represents the prayers of the saints in the New Testament, right? That is called a type, a picture. So I think the Bible is full of these types, these little hints that are really cool when you look at them. So this is what we see in the life of Abraham, and it's really kind of neat. I think his life might parallel ours in a pretty big way. Why also do I say that? It's very easy for us to focus on Moses because the Mosaic law is huge. And today when, when religious groups get in conflict with the state or whatever, a lot of times it's because, a plaque of the Ten Commandments is somewhere, you know what I mean? And we want to leave it, and some group says, that offends me, I want that gone or whatever. Well, did you ever actually stop to think when there's a plaque of the Ten Commandments? Did you stop and say, well, you know what, that's not really my religion. You know what I mean? In a technical sense, the Ten Commandments are a summary of God's law. God's law was given who? Given where? It was given to the Jews. The Jews, the physical Israel of the day. Now, all of that teaches us things which apply to the new covenant, and we for sure learn things about God's will and God's nature from that. But the specific commands that God gave were for the specific nation of Israel. It was a theocracy. It was a very special government. It was a very unique situation. We don't pick up stones and stone people to death in the church or do certain sins. But if you were in Israel, you would do that, right? It was a different situation. So it's easy how we give a lot of attention to Moses. But the New Testament authors, when they want to describe what the church is like, they are dealing with a lot of Jews. They're very hung up on Moses. And Paul in particular tries to get them to think, hey, don't get so hung up on these laws, the circumcision, the things that Moses taught you. Yes, they were important. Yes, they're part of your heritage. Yes, they're huge. But look at Abraham. He will go back to Abraham. And in the book of Galatians, I believe, right? In the book of Galatians, he will say, look, you're sons of God. You're saved in the same way Abraham was saved. Well, what did Abraham do initially to be saved, if you think about it? Did he do anything to earn his salvation? Well, no. He was just a random guy out there that God came to him and said, hey, Abraham, and as far as I know, he doesn't say, you're just a great person. You really stand out in this crowd. I really appreciate the things that you've been doing. As far as I know, he doesn't say any of that. He just says, Abraham, I'm going to make somebody special out of you and your nation. The whole world's going to be blessed through you. wow, well, that's great. God came to him and initiated contact, and he, in faith, left a place, which actually kind of translated means fire and destruction, left that and eventually went to the place where he would bow the knee to God. And you'll see throughout his life, mentally, in his attitude, he becomes more of the kind of person who will bow the knee to whatever God says. Initially, in the beginning of his life, and not even just in the beginning, but mostly in the beginning, you see him trying to obey God, but I have doubts. I have reservations, and so I'll try to cover my tracks by helping him out with this. I'll get my Egyptian maid pregnant, and we'll count that as my son. I'll stay in Canaan for a while, but then I'll go to Egypt, and you'll just tell half-truths, say you're my sister, not just my wife. That way we won't get killed. We don't want to ruin God's promise, by letting me get killed. So he's working on trusting God, but he's not fully committed. But then later on in his life, when he finally gets the promised child, and we'll get to this eventually, remember what God tells him to do with that promised child, Isaac? He says, take him to this mountain and do what? Sacrifice him to me. What logical sense does that make with what anyone knows about God? Has God ever asked for a human sacrifice? Not physically. Spiritually, we're all a living sacrifice to God, right? By our living, But physically, God has never, ever wanted a human sacrifice for him like that. But Abraham, somehow, some way, just says, okay, and takes him and is about to do it anyway. Now, I don't know about you, but that communicates to me that he has really bowed the knee at that point in his life. He has really gotten to the point where he trusts God. And the New Testament explains what he was thinking. Hebrews 11 says, Abraham knew God could raise the dead. And so that's what he thought was going to happen, that I'm going to kill my son and God's going to raise him back. He had that much trust in who God is. So, how are we saved? By faith. How was Abraham saved? By faith. Was Abraham saved by the law of Moses? No. The law of Moses wasn't even around. Nobody knew it yet. It didn't exist. But Abraham had been called anyway, and Abraham is called a friend of God. And every Jew in Jesus' day knew Abraham, important figure. Nobody would ever argue that Abraham was somehow not saved, even though he didn't have the law. It's kind of a picture of the grace that we get to experience in the church. We didn't deserve it, but God offered this sacrifice on our behalf so that everybody can be saved, just as long as we put our faith in him. If we trust him, bow the knee. That's kind of the idea. Now, about that rabbit trail, still in my mind. Was it last week we were talking about when he went to Egypt and he had his wife tell that little lie about, just honey, Sarah, just say I'm your sister, or you're my sister. Yeah, that's what he said, right? That was last week, I think we covered that. Maybe it was before, I don't know. But, knowing what I know about Sarah, it's easy to get a little bit, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I get a little, down on her a little bit. I tend to think of her as the one that kind of laughed at the idea that she could have a child in her old age, But granted, most 90-year-old women don't have kids. But you should have trusted God, right? And I tend to think of her in that regard as a woman that, well, not only that, but in the situation where she allows her handmaid Hagar to marry Abram and to have a child through him, and then she gets upset about Hagar and says, get this woman out of here. Well, I tend to think of her that way too, and I'm like, man, she sounds like a real emotional flake. I'm like, man, I tend to think of her in a bad light. And granted, nobody's perfect, but when you look at the whole picture, I'm not sure that's a fair way to think of her. I know in the New Testament she's used in a positive light as a picture of something. I don't remember what it is now, but it's in Galatians too, isn't it? So you ought to read that. Oh, and First Peter. So she's mentioned positively in both places, right? Yeah. Okay, there's that, but also, how much trust would it take to do what your husband is asking you to do here? Your husband says, please, just say you're my sister. That's true, isn't it? Yeah, because you are a half-sister, technically. That was a true fact. So just tell them that, don't tell them the other. Why? So that I could live and they won't kill me to take you. What kind of love does that communicate? Well, it doesn't seem like a very loving thing for a husband to do. But man, for a wife to be willing to comply with that, because evidently she did. She said, all right, that's what the husband wants, I'll do it. And she did, knowing what that could lead to, right? That, to me, speaks of this concept of love. Last night I came home, and my wife and Phoenix were watching this chick flick, and she told me, hey, it was Phoenix's movie, I didn't want to watch it. And I sat down and I watched the rest of it. And oh man, I tell you what, I hate those movies. They're terrible. Sorry, but they are fun entertainment, I'll give them that. But then, call it a coincidence, but somebody today was asking me questions about how do I know when I'm really in love? You know, how do I know when it really is that? And my first response is, I don't think you want to ask me that question. I'm not the one to talk about that. But we have glorified this love like it's a condition, like it's a state of being. And I really thought that love was a verb. What is a verb? That's something you do. That's an action you take, right? I think Sarah is a great example of love because she didn't want to do what she did, but she committed an action anyway. She said, all right, I will say what you're asking me to say. So what is love? I don't think it's like something you trip and fall into. I think it's something you consistently choose over and over and over again. A lot like, I don't know, well, we can call it an addiction or whatever. Are you in a state of addiction? Well, if so, it's not because that just happened, not just because there was magic involved and boom, you're there. You made a bunch of deliberate choices to get yourself to use over and over and over and over again, and now you are there. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It is a choice. It is something you choose to do. And every romantic movie that I see always focuses on the magic, the stuff that just clicks. It's really consumer love. Consumerism is all it is. But focuses on that, and then it fast forwards like a year later, you know, things are great and everything's good. I'm like, wait, you should have focused on that year. You tell me how great a year is going to be when she ran off from him at the altar and he ran off from her at this time or whatever, and they met up, and you tell me those kind of people how they're doing after a year. You just tell me that. I want a movie about that. But you won't see that. All you'll see is the magic of everything just falling together, and that's the way it's supposed to be. You know what? I think it is fun to watch, and it is cool to watch for entertainment value, but the reason why I don't like it too much is because I think some people watch it and believe it. Yeah. I think people actually think this is true, and they actually think this is love, and that would explain perfectly why. If you believe half of what you see in these movies, then I can fully understand why you're not doing great in relationships and your marriages are not lasting long at all. Because they're not built on something greater, that greater commitment that doesn't always feel as good as you want, isn't always as committed. And Sarah probably didn't feel that excited about, oh yeah, I'm just going to throw myself out there to the wolves, basically, in Egypt. But she did it anyway. Why? Because she loved her husband. And he was not very loving to her by doing that, unfortunately. So she is a good example. I don't know that we should think down on her as much as perhaps I do. So with all that being said, this is Genesis, the 18th chapter. Genesis chapter 18 is where I want to pick up today. Could somebody read, let's read the first 2 verses, and then let's go ahead and read verses 8 through 15. So whoever wants to read, please go for it.
Now the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him, and when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth.
Okay, pause there real quick. The Lord came. The Lord, and in this Bible, how did you put it there? 3 men were standing opposite him. Okay, this has it in lowercase, which probably isn't the best. Did any of you have that in your Bible? Is the word Lord all
Uppercase.
Is it uppercase? Is it all uppercase? Yeah. What does it mean when the word Lord in your Bible is used in all uppercase letters?
He's yelling.
That's what it would mean in modern day English. But the translators usually do that to let us know this is the special name of God, the Yahweh. This is the personal name. Because there's another word that just means sir or lord or master, like a landlord or something like that. That would be a lowercase, L-O-R-D. But in a lot of versions you have the capital L, and then they're smaller sometimes, but they're still caps. O-R-D are still capital letters. And that is, apparently not in this version, but that is what we're talking about. The Lord appeared, but I thought, what 3 men? How did God appear? Well, God apparently came as a man. We've heard of that being done, haven't we? But I do find this interesting. You talk about relatability. God came as a man. It says, behold, 3 men. Later we're going to see one goes one way and the other 2 go different ways. Presumably it would be God with a couple of angels. But it's very interesting. Didn't you guys know the... No, I won't get into that. Won't waste your time. Let's read verses 8 through 15.
He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Then they said to him, "Where is Sarah your wife?" And he said, "There, in the tent." He said, "I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah your wife will have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have become old, shall I have the pleasure, my Lord, being old also?" And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I indeed bear a child, which I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah denied it, however, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "No, but you did laugh."
I'm sorry, but I can't help but see the humor here. When Sarah's in shock, and God is there in flesh, he says, "I'm going to come next year, and she's going to have a child," and she's outside listening, laughs at the idea, she'll be 90 years old when that happens. That's pretty old. So she laughs at the idea, but then kind of goes back and realizes, uh-oh, I laughed. And then God says, "Why did she laugh?" And her response, what a brilliant response. What was that response? No, she denied it. "I didn't laugh." Now, just pause and think. The God of the universe takes the time to come into a body, come down and visit you and give a special message to you, and then you tell a little lie right to his face. Yeah. I would just be a little bit afraid of, I don't know, a lightning bolt, maybe something bad happening at that point. Like, you know what? Even what's another guy that was a little bit doubtful? Wasn't it John the Baptist dad, Zechariah, when he seemed a little wishy-washy? What happened to him? Like, okay, you don't want to go with this? Fine, you're not going to talk. Shut up. Shut up. Right? But God here just says, "Yes, you did," and that's it. I don't know. I just love the way that you can't pin God down. You can't guarantee how he's going to respond in every situation. He knows us, and we don't really know all of him, but we're trying. And so he works with people. He did laugh. Now, we know the name of the son that's going to be born. What's that son's name?
Isaac.
Isaac. And his name means what? Laughter. Yeah, it means laughter. So I have a feeling she never forgot that moment when she lied to God about laughing. Probably wish she could take that back, but it's not going away. All right. Skipping to verse 20 here, God continues the conversation. And man, this is significant, you know, man-to-man conversation. And the Lord said, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's business talk now, is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down to see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom. And Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Abraham came near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous people within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of the earth deal justly? So the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare the whole place on their account. Now this continues. He didn't stop at 50. And we're not going to read all those verses, but if you look through, what does he do next? Well, you agreed to 50, God. How about 45? Well, what if only... And he's persistent. By the end, you remember where he ends up? How many people does God say? Does Abraham say, hey, if there are only this many people left, will you spare the city? And God says, yes, I will spare the city. How many people?
10.
10. Down to 10 people. Now, you know in that city, who lives there? Lot's wife, 3 daughters, 2 daughters, and their husbands. So that's, what do we have, like 6 people? We're pretty good odds, right? We've got a list of righteous people that are already there. Abraham stops. But here's the question. What if he didn't stop? I don't remember who brought that up. Somebody in a sermon one time. But what if he kept praying? Maybe God would have kept going, you know. But he stopped there. He felt like he was being respectful. He felt like he had pushed the issue enough. I like verse 21 a lot. I don't know about you. I think God says it this way for our benefit. I will go down now to see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. It's not. I don't think this is saying that God is unobservant, that God doesn't already know what's going on. But I do think this is one of those verses that is mentioned for our benefit. I'm going to tally up. I'm going to really look into what's happening there. God knows, but God is really going to investigate. He's talking about the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. There are 2 other wicked cities there, Admah and Zeboim as well. But God's not just going to destroy them. He's not just going to destroy them. He's first going to go investigate. And why investigate? We need to see if, well, what's the reason? Why is he investigating first? What's he looking for?
Righteous people.
He's trying to see if the sin justifies the destruction. God isn't the kind of person that just wipes people out because he enjoys it or something. He's going to look to make sure that these actions are justified for these people. So he investigates that. Same thing with the sin of the Amorites in the land of Canaan. God doesn't just say, oh, they're wicked people, offspring of wicked angels, or whatever, depending on your view, you know, wipe them all out. No, he says, hold on, not yet. Why? Their sin hasn't reached its peak. It's not quite as bad. It's not quite bad enough to justify me destroying them all yet. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty amazing. But that's the kind of thing that God does, and it fits very well with what Abraham says. He appeals to God's justice. Shall not the judge of the earth deal justly? And by the way, I think that's a wonderful thing. If you, I'm not saying manipulate God or whatever, but I think God appreciates it when you speak what you know about him, and you say, God, I know you are a righteous God, and because I know that's how good and how righteous you are, I want to ask that this righteous thing be done in this situation. You know what I mean? Appeal to that. Appeal to who God is, God's wonderful nature. I think God loves that. It's a way of not just asking for something, it's a way of praising him at the same time that you're asking for something. And so that's a neat thing that I think we can learn from Father Abraham, exalted great Father there. All right, this puts us into the 19th chapter. Can I get another brave reader who's interested in reading the first 11 verses of this chapter?
Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. And he said, Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet, and you might rise up early and go your way. And they said, however, no, but we'll spend the night in the square. Yet he urged them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, and all the people from every quarter. And they called to Lot and said to him, Who are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may have relations with them. But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him, and said, Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now behold, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with men. Please let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you like. Only do nothing to these men, inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof. But they said, Stand aside. Furthermore, they said, This one came in as an alien, and already he's acting like a judge. Now we will treat you worse than them. So they pressed hard against Lot and came near to break the door. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. They struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves trying to find the doorway.
Thank you for reading all that. Isn't that ridiculous? You know, Lot is someone that doesn't look too good here. And in other places in Scripture, he's going to look worse. But first off, let's take this in order a little bit. People come, the 2 angels come and say, hey, let's spend the night in the square. That's a common practice. If you don't have someone inviting you in, which they would often do, and show you hospitality, you just stay in the square. It's acceptable. But Lot seems eager. No, I insist. Come spend the night with me. Why was he so eager? I think he knows a thing or two about the place that he lives, right? It's a wicked place. And you guys already know this, but that's where our word sodomy comes from. Sodom. It's a wicked place. And so he said, no, you do not stay out there. You come into my house. I'm going to take care of you. He was trying to do the right thing there. But the entire city came together. All these men of this city came together in order to molest, to rape these men. Now, first off, these men were angels. Something to think about, because they were angels, but yet the town thought of them as men. That seems to be a trend. If people in Scripture saw an angel, they were either freaked out beyond their brains and would faint and pass out, or if it wasn't a freaking out experience, it was, oh, it's a man. You know, that seems to be the general trend that we see with angels. And Lot is caught between a rock and a hard place, or between a door frame and I don't know, whatever. But he's caught in a terrible situation, and so he tries to weasel his way out. And I want you to see what he's doing, as awful as it is. And you recognize how awful this is. In his particular culture, what he is doing is trying to create a lesser evil. He knows that it is not right and that his daughters do not deserve to be raped. He knows that. But at the same time, in that society, in that culture, they elevated men, these visitors, at a higher status. And if he knew a thing or two about who these men were, he would be trying to do everything he can to keep this from happening. And so he probably is trying to, he's not rationalized, but he's probably trying to do the best thing with what he has. Like, well, I feel like this would be better than that. That's going to come back to haunt him later, by the way. The way he treated his daughters is going to come back. I believe it's in this same chapter, or really soon it's going to come back and haunt him. But he was trying to do the right thing. I know it doesn't sound like it does, but I think that's what he was trying to do. And it was not the right thing. It was the wrong thing. It was just bad. There was nothing he could do. And the men of the city would have none of it. Fortunately, the angel struck them with blindness. Now, this, sometimes there are certain indications that kind of give you a clue that a city is pretty evil. Well, I think this is enough for God to know that, this city's pretty bad. It's time for it to go. And we do need to remember, God doesn't just kill people, destroy cities, do crazy things like that because of sin for just little reasons. It's kind of a big deal. This is a really bad city. And I've read some goofy stuff where people try to say, all Scripture says is that the men were trying to just know them, just try to get to know them or whatever. No, you don't go break down somebody's door because you want to shake their hand and meet them. You know what I mean? No is a euphemism for sex. It's been that way all throughout the Old Testament. So that's what they were trying to do. So, about this Lot character. What you see about him in Genesis looks awful. So, I'd like to read what an inspired author writes by the name of Peter in 2 Peter chapter 2. This is a reference that is probably good to have. 2 Peter 2, verse 7 and verse 8. Here's what the New Testament says about Lot. It says there in verse 7, "And if he rescued Lot, a righteous man, who was distressed by the filthy lies of lawless men. For that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard." That's just an offhanded comment being made in a bigger context. But what is Lot called there? What kind of man? A righteous man. We are dealing with a righteous man here. A righteous man. That's what the New Testament says about him. So why is he so evil? Why does he act so bad? Well, you know what? I don't think it matters how good you are. If you get yourself in a bad enough situation, you're not really able to be so good anymore. You know what I mean? The best thing you can do is still going to be pretty bad. You can't reason your way out of it. There is a danger in being too wrapped up in a bad place. And I think God knows what he's talking about. And I was discussing this with somebody recently, but in the New Testament, the book of Corinthians, when God says, hey, don't be unequally yoked together with unbelievers, what do righteousness and wickedness, what do they have in common with each other? God knows what he's talking about. And it's not just because these things, they don't have anything in common or whatever, but one tends to influence the other. And a lot of times, especially in relationships, it usually is easier to bring somebody down than to lift them up. So it's a dangerous thing. So even though this man was righteous, he sure doesn't look like it because of where he was. Something for us to think about too. Maybe we shouldn't always be where we are. You know what I mean? Or maybe we should consider our surroundings, because that has a pretty great effect on us, or at least it sure did in Lot's case. Somebody read verse 12 through 14 for me, please.
Then the two men said to Lot, "Whom else have you here? A son-in-law and your sons and your daughters, and whomever you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because our outcry has become so great before the Lord, that the Lord has sent us to destroy it." Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, and said, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city." But he appeared to his sons-in-law to be jesting.
By the way, you can, if you guys want, you can read from your own Bible. I don't put this up here to make you read from it, just so you know. Some of this font's probably pretty ridiculous the further back you get, so don't feel like you have to read it from this. But the men say, hey, it's time to get out of here. And so Lot rounds up his family. Let me get my sons-in-law. Let's get out of here. And his sons-in-law think, what about him? Oh, he's joking. Joking? First off, what kind of a guy was Lot? Like, was he that big of a prankster that people would think that he would pull one like this? I don't know, but you know what is interesting to me? If somebody said to you, a righteous man, said to you, hey, we need to get out of here, God's going to destroy it, this is not the place for you to be, run. maybe it would be a little hard to take him seriously, because why have you lived here so long, Lot? If this place is so bad and God's going to destroy it, you didn't act yesterday like there was a problem, you know? So this must be some sort of a joke or whatever. And I want you to think about that. For a righteous person, how does it feel to not be taken seriously? Now, I know what it's like for a parent. For a parent to give advice, correction, words that are needed to be heard, and the child doesn't listen, that doesn't feel good. And you watch them go and suffer because of it. Well, can you imagine, too, being a righteous person, trying to do the right thing in a terrible environment that you probably never should have gotten yourself in, but you feel stuck, and now something really bad is going to happen to your family, and you try to get them out, but all they do is they think you're joking, and they will not even take you seriously. That's got to be a terrible feeling. It's got to be a very lonely feeling. So it's not just the sinful aspect of, oh, Lot, you shouldn't have been there, shame on you. But it's also the depressing aspect. When you get yourself into these kind of situations, these environments that you don't belong in, and you still try to live a holy life, you're going to feel a little depressed and isolated because you don't fit. You know what I mean? You just don't belong there. And don't be surprised when people don't take you as seriously. Which is a reminder to me, personal story, one of the hardest decisions for me to make, and this might sound kind of silly to you, but I was trying to get to know one of my neighbors in my old neighborhood, and I had a little bit of a relational connection, a real small one there. We were both kind of doing lawn business stuff, so I could talk to him about that. But I had an opportunity to, he invited me over to play cards with his buddies, but they gambled when they played cards and stuff, which I'm sure there are other things too, but you know, he wasn't a Christian or anything, and I was trying to be a witness to him. But man, that I have to admit, that was kind of a challenge for me, because I'm just thinking, you know, I would love to go over there and get to know you better and connect on a relational level. And maybe I could justify a few bucks to do that. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. But you know, I guess that is. Thankfully, I haven't gotten into that. But you know, I just realized, like, I've always told myself up to this point that this is wrong, that I shouldn't do it. So should I really change that now just because I want to? And so, you know, I tried to be as polite as I could, but I said, hey, you're going to make me broke. You're going to rob me for everything I have, so I can't do that. Because I'm a terrible liar, and you guys would figure me out. Anyway, but you know, that for a while that kind of haunted me a bit. I just thought, man, what if I did that? Maybe I should have taken that step or whatever. But the older I get, the more I kind of think, no, I think people appreciate you when you actually stand for something, when you are actually consistent. And maybe at the moment it doesn't seem like it, but later on it might mean something. And if I were to jump into his world and his environment, and like you say, I started that way and I get a little more sucked in, how am I really going to have that equity? How do I stand out? How do I bring him out of that thing that I've just kind of come into, you know? Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't become all things to all people. I think we should be as relatable and as real and genuine as we can. But that doesn't mean you do the same things that people do and you put yourself in the same situations. So that's what, I mean, otherwise, what do you need God? Well, he came to save us from something, didn't he? Right? So, all right. Verse 15, all the way down to the 26, it says, when morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he hesitated. You can see Lot's torn, right? You can see it. So the men seized his hand, and the hand of his wife, and the hands of his 2 daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him. And they brought him out and put him outside the city. When they had brought them outside, one said, escape for your life. Don't look behind you, and do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away. But Lot said to them, oh no, my lords. Now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight. You have magnified your loving kindness, which you have shown to me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, for disaster will overtake me and I will die. Now behold, there is a town near enough to flee to, and it's small. Please let me escape there. Is it not small, that my life may be saved? He said to him, behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore the name of the town was called Zor. The sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zor. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But his wife from behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Why a pillar of salt? Well, presumably because that's very similar to the substance that God was raining down on them, burning sulfur to destroy the cities. Now, I used to think like, did any of you know what OCD is? Obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay. Did any of you also know the temptation of when somebody says don't do something and you don't know why? You're like, what, especially a little kid, you know, and this is when I was younger, I'd think this, why not? Now I kind of want to do that. I didn't want to do it before, but now I used to think of Lot's wife that way. I'm just like, don't look back. But this is a colossal piece of destruction, you know what I mean? Like, especially as a young boy, I'm like, I would want to see that, you know? Why is God letting me see that? And I just thought it sure seemed pretty unreasonable to, up her sodium count that much just because she took a peek back. But I don't think that's what's going on. I don't think she took a peek back. Why do you deliberately disobey God's orders, the orders of the angels, to look back? Well, I think it's because she looked back. She gazed back. And what kind of look is that? It's a look of longing. She wanted to be back there. You know, her home, her people, everywhere, you know, is just getting destroyed, and she is just in direct defiance of God, looking to it anyway. And so God says, okay, you want to be with that? There you go. You are now with that. Be careful where you look, because what if God lets you be with what you're looking for? That's not always a good thing, right? Man, God's gracious with Lot, though. He is incredibly gracious, and that is characteristic of who God is. He rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah. We also know there are the cities of the valley, Admah and Zeboim as well, the burning sulfur. But who died? I mean, if you recall, all the men of the city came out to do this molestation, we'll call it, right? But God didn't just kill the men. Who did God kill? Everyone there. And not just everyone there. When he was raining down burning sulfur, what did that also kill? Not just the humans.
Animals.
Livestock, everything. Why? Why would God do that? Well, you have to think. Sin is not just a, single effect type of disease, right? It is, and several of you have been talking to me about sicknesses and viruses and things that go around. We know these things make their way around, and we don't even want them to spread, but sometimes they do. Well, sometimes it helps to picture sin the same kind of way. It has effects that travel. And you know what? Somebody pointed this out to me a while ago, but it's so true. If you're in a society that is sexually completely unrestrained, there's a lot of bestiality going on there too. There's a lot of any sort of sexual experimentation that you want to do is there. What accompanies that? A lot of diseases and a lot of really bad things that would be spread. So why sometimes did God say to kill the animals? Well, I think that's one reason why. Because God knows in order to protect people at other locations from these diseases and stuff, you've got to wipe it all out. And anything else here, it's gone. By the way, how gone is Sodom and Gomorrah? It is so gone that my understanding is archaeologists have debates on where the location is. It is so obscure. I think some of them think it's located in the bottom of what is now the Dead Sea. Interestingly enough, has the highest salt content of any sea in the world. Curious, right? But we don't know. So God obliterated that place. He surely did. So
Seth, what about the growth? It says, and what grew on the ground?
Yeah, I think that got destroyed too. And I don't know if that's because, I don't want to claim that I know why God did everything he did, but I wonder, is there disease associated with the ground too? Or is that just an indication of this is how bad the destruction was, the ground didn't make it either? You know, I'm not really worried about it because you guys, I don't call you murderers when you go out and cut your grass, okay? You're not evil people and you rip the fruit right off that tree. So, it doesn't bother me, but yeah. That's bad. Somebody else read verses 27 through 29 for me.
Now Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. Thus it came about, when God destroyed the cities of the valley, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overflow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived.
So why do we bring up Abraham here? Well, Lot was saved, but why do you think Lot was saved? Was it just because God's a righteous God and he wanted to save him? Or was it because God is a God who answers prayer, and the prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective? I think the answer is yes. I think that's the kind of God we serve. God was answering a prayer, and God is righteous, so perhaps this is going to happen anyway. I don't know. But Abraham mentioned here, I think that's on purpose, because we need to remember this is a result of Abraham's prayer. This is him pleading to God. Abraham's not a perfect guy. He made his fair share of mistakes. Lot shouldn't even be here, really. Abraham should have left him behind, but here he is. And God's working with him anyway. Because that's the kind of God he is. That's the kind of God you and I serve. So God does answer prayer, and that is worth mentioning even in a place like this. Okay. Further down, this is actually a pretty bad chapter, so sorry about that. Lot went up from Zor. You didn't think it could get worse, did you? You didn't think it could. Lot went up from Zor and stayed in the mountains, his 2 daughters with him, for he was afraid to stay in Zor, and he stayed in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. That's it. I'll isolate myself from all the evil. There you go. Get away from it. Then the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old. There is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine. Let us lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night. And the firstborn went in and lay with her father. And he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. On the following day, the firstborn said to the younger, behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, that you may go in and lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The first bore a son and called him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. As for the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the sons of Ammon. Wow. Wow. There you go. Just because you think, oh, I'll be a hermit, I'll isolate myself from all the evil, I'll protect my family from all the evil. No, that doesn't necessarily work either. And I don't know, I just tend to think this has a little bit, possibly, this is an opinion, but this has a little bit to do with the way he treated those virgin daughters earlier, being ready to throw them out to the wolves to save the other 2. I think that probably has an effect on what's going on here in this situation. So what an awful thing. And by the way, not only that, but what do we know about Moab and about Ammon? The Moabites and the Ammonites, are they good Christian folk?
Not hard.
No.
No. The Moabites, now Ruth came from there, and I'm so glad she got out of there. The Moabites were one of the famous groups of people for worshiping the god Chemosh, or Molech, I believe is another name they use, or maybe it's a different god, I confuse them. the god with the hands, the idol with the hands that were held out, heated red hot with a fire, and then they would take an infant and throw the infant into the red hot hands of Molech. That's the group of people that we're talking with here that got preserved. So I gotta admit it. You think you know people. You think you understand what God is telling you about them. But then you look at the New Testament in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7 and 8. Lot is called a righteous man who is tormented by all the evil around him. So I want you to think about that. Think about righteous man hates all this evil, and somehow match that up with what you see going on here and all the bad things in his life. I think it's a pretty stern lesson of all the things that will come your way and all the bad situations you will be in, even while you're trying to be good, if you allow yourself to go places that you should not go. If you allow yourself to be places that you really do not belong. It's just not that easy. So, if you're somewhere trying to be a witness, but then you realize your witness is not being very effective, you're being affected, what do? What is the Jesus response? It might come to your job, your school, might be household type tension perhaps, or relationship or something. What does Jesus tell us to do with something that causes us to sin? In Matthew, Matthew chapter 5, verse 29 and verse 30, Jesus says, if your right hand causes you to sin,
Cut it off.
cut it off. Cut it off and throw it away. Why? Because it's better to go to heaven without a hand than to be burned up with your whole body. Now that's clearly a metaphor, right? I don't think he's asking us to amputate pieces of our body, and I don't think he's trying to say that your physical body is what goes, but he's using the metaphor to teach us something. And I think Lot is a great example of that lesson. You know what? This might be a beautiful place to live. It might be a great opportunity, but Lot should not have lived in Sodom. He should not have gone there. And what if, even though it might have seemed unfair to Lot, why does Abraham get to go and follow God to the great promises and going to follow the Messiah and everything? Why can't I go with him? I am going with him, and he goes. But sure sounds better. But what if Abraham had obeyed God and made Lot stay behind? What would his life have looked like? Well, I have a hunch it wouldn't have looked nearly as bad as what he actually got. You know what I mean? Any questions about any of this? Kind of a depressing place to leave.
The place that Abraham and Lot left originally was, did you see that her name for that was destruction?
Oh, yeah. Ur of the Chaldees. Yeah. It was the place of fire and destruction. Which is funny because I'm sure it didn't look like it because it was a nice thriving city, big thriving city. But it translated means fire and destruction, yeah. Any other questions or comments about this? I was going to say we learned a lot. All right, well, let's go ahead and pray before we dismiss here. Father, I do want to thank you for teaching us, and you're breaking our molds again. You're stretching our minds, because how could a righteous man be doing all these things and be involved in all this junk? And God, we know we're supposed to be in this world, but not of it. We're supposed to be righteous people. Hopefully we are being that. But God, please continue to make us better and better. And God, we know when we listen to you, when we really bow the knee to you, you do pull us through a lot of terrible situations. And thank you so much for doing that. God, I pray that we would listen to you also so that we could avoid some of the greater difficulties in life that we just simply wouldn't have had to go through if we had listened to you in the first place. God, I pray that for those that are around us, for our kids, and for the people that we get to mentor or influence, that you would help us to be genuine and thoughtful in their case, so that maybe we could spare them some of the trouble too. But God, at the same time, thank you that you still promise that Romans 8:28, that you work everything together for the good of those who love you, called according to your purpose. Thank you so much, Father. And it's in your Son's name we thank you.
Amen.
Thanks, Seth.
Good.